This is Eddie Hope with Virginia Professional Wildlife Removal Services in Kintz-Early, Virginia, and you are listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your pest geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And now for today's topic. You're at a conference?
Yeah, I'm at the National Conference of Urban Entomology.
That is so awesome.
Yeah, I thought we might want to talk about that briefly too.
Where is this at now? Is this in the Northeast?
It's in Cary, North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. Okay, I just drove through there. I
know.
It seems like I drove through everywhere. I drove through half the United States. I did, I think, 1,700 miles in 4 days. So... Yeah, so my wife wanted a road trip. She definitely doesn't want a road trip anymore. So
yeah, you covered some serious ground.
Yeah, we went we went Miami and then Savannah to Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville, North Carolina. We just made it into the mountains, and we did a train ride there for almost an entire day, half a day. And we drove back all the way to into Atlanta and spent overnight in Atlanta, and then drove into Miami, got back around 10 o'clock at night on Saturday. So
wow.
Yeah, I needed to unwind, and that was a really long drive to unwind. But I hadn't done that in a while, and now I know why. So
wow,
yeah. So I'm definitely getting too old for those road trips. I told her next time we're just flying. but she got to see why the Smoky Mountains were smoky.
And they're beautiful.
No, they are. I did that many years ago. It was probably the last time I was in the Smoky Mountains that I actually went over there to enjoy them. I was probably like 22, 23. Maybe, and then I did it again probably when I was back in I think 2000. I was back there and drove through them, coming from Ohio, and that was the last time I've been out that far, traveling in car. And I just don't, I just don't have what it takes anymore to drive, 20 hours straight.
I hear you. Yeah, it seemed easy in my early 20s. Now, not so much.
Yeah, no, I forgot about how old I've gotten.
It's easy to forget. It's frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, my mind still thinks I'm 20. My body says, no, you're not close.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly inconvenient, don't you think?
Yeah, age.
Really inconvenient.
Everything that comes along with it. But tell me, I'm gonna what is it that I'm recording? So tell me what you're doing in North Carolina at the convention. What's been going on there?
So I'm at the 2018 National Conference on Urban Entomology, and this year it's also being held in conjunction with the Invasive and Pest Ant Conference, which used to be the Fire Ant Conference.
Okay.
So yeah, we probably got, I was going to guess it's maybe 200 urban entomologists here. So
okay.
it's I guess you could call it an intimate group. So it's a really, smaller meetings like this, you have so much more time to visit with your colleagues and meet new people and
right.
Really focus on the research that affects the pest control industry. I mean, this is what this meeting almost exclusively about. So it's a really fascinating one because you get to hear some of the basic research that usually blossoms into hopefully something that fits us for applied work. But you also get to hear a lot of the applied work, especially like the new species that are coming out or that they're really starting to notice.
Okay.
It's like the dark rover ants. So we had a really great talk about that today. And there'll be lots of bed bug talks, of course, and ticks. So we're excited to hear about ticks.
Okay.
They've been getting quite a bit of media and lots of ants, and there's even a rodent section.
Wow. And so what has been like the most interesting topic so far?
It started last night with a reception. So today, so far, for me, it was the rover ant.
Okay.
Because people aren't really looking for it, and they don't realize, and it's like the size of several grains of salt. I mean, they're really, really tiny.
Wow.
Yeah, they're really small, and the student that gave that research, he found they were in every county of South Carolina, and they believe that they're definitely in North Carolina. So he suspects that they're spread much more throughout basically all the South United States, more than anybody thought. So, and what's fascinating about them is they like to be with other invasive, aggressive species. So they're happiest with Argentine ants and red imported fire ants, which I was fascinated by.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So we got this species that, it's going to adapt very easily anywhere it goes because it doesn't, it's not very antagonistic.
I mean, in the fire ants, they said they actually do, like antennal communication and move on.
Wow.
They don't even fight each other. Yeah, how crazy is that?
No, that's amazing.
So that was a good start to the day's meeting, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the new bed bug talks, and especially the tick talks. That'll be really fun to hear because it's kind of an upcoming area again. Ticks were forgotten about for a long time.
Yeah, no, I don't have a lot of things with ticks down here in Florida. Hasn't been a big problem for us, at least not here in Miami. More fleas this year than anything, but ticks hasn't been a big issue for us. I guess maybe because we just get dog tick down here. That's pretty much all we have. So a lot of other places probably are dealing with other types of tick, like deer tick and stuff. But here, it's just dog tick for us down here in Miami. We're really urban, so, not a lot of horses and stuff running around, deer and horses running around the city. But I can imagine that would be a horrid thing, in other places of the country where there is. I just saw a lot of cows.
Oh.
Yeah, and started observing cows as they were laying down, sleeping in pastures. Because Harry told me about how, certain animals will sleep on one side and the meat is a lot more tender. Because so now everywhere I go, I start observing cows, and seeing how many were flipped on one side and how many were flipped on the other. Hey, he's right. The stuff I was able to observe for miles as I drove through the country.
The things we learned from Harry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he just made a post a few minutes ago about 40-something things that he had to deal with after a barbecue competition, and one of them he figured out why vanity mirrors are in porta potties, which that really the only thing I took away from that because that was about the most curious thing out of all the things he said. So I'm waiting to hear the response of why we have vanity mirrors in porta potties. Yeah.
I might be afraid to know the answer.
I don't know, but I'm going to find out because, it's just a terrible piece of information to waste. I mean, you never know when that's going to come in handy if you're ever on the road. And, I go to a lot of construction sites, so I really need to know this. It's
true.
Yeah,
well, I'll have to look for that.
Yeah. So we'll wait for his answer on it. He won third place on ribs. And he's really bumming out because he got like 20 something out of 43 on another. His beans were not very good, so he's bummed out about his beans. And so we'll have to get him I don't know, maybe get him a bottle of canned beans or something and send it to him. Maybe he'll feel better. I don't know if that'll help. So we're trying to figure this one out, but I'm trying to help the guy out. He's pretty bummed out. I mean,
Yeah.
He's complaining he's breaking even on all these competitions of the money he spends, plus whatever he makes, he breaks even. So I don't know. I think he just goes for the abuse. I'm just trying to figure it out for him. I'm trying to help the brother out, but we'll find out.
Somebody probably has canned beans in their thing just to see what happens.
Yeah. So I'm gonna send him a copy of this podcast after we're done, and I think he's probably still soaking. So I'll just wait. I'll wait a couple days and let him deal with it. And the next call he gets is on borates, and he'll be over it. So that'll be fine. So what's going on with bees? Tell me about bees. I mean, what's been going on with pollinators?
Well, it's interesting. I had a pest control association because I go around the country teaching CEUs.
Right.
And Canada asked me to go up there in Alberta and speak about bees and wasps and pollinators.
Okay.
And pesticide effects. And so, I have to say I was kind of ignorant on the topic, I guess you could say. I just never really paid a whole lot of attention. You hear the whole, it's the fault of pesticides, and
right.
Being a scientist, I'm like, I'm not sure it's always that, but I never really looked into it.
Right.
I was floored by the amount of information and how complicated the whole thing is. It's not crystal clear at all, and it's a shame because there's really no one out there talking about the big picture. And as in our industry, I think it's important for us to be able to, more or less defend ourselves, or at least have better understanding of it. It's not to say there's definitely something going on with the bees, and I'm pro pesticide. I'm not going to say that it's the pesticide's fault, but they're not crystal clear on it.
Right.
But what was fascinating was how incredibly complicated it was, and one of the things that really shocked me was I found data where they showed like the number of bees in surveys that were collected, and the surveys for the longest time just occurred like in the middle of the summer. And then all of a sudden they started collecting data like in the winter or in the spring or in the fall.
Right.
And a lot of times that coincided with the bee colonies being split up. So, they'll take one big colony and they'll split it into two, and they'll put a new queen with the split colony. So when you do that, when you only select your data and the population numbers for the summer, they seem fairly consistent. And, there's always going to be some issues, but they're fairly consistent from year to year. Well, when they suddenly started taking the data at other times of the year, especially after they split these colonies, suddenly there's a massive drop in population. Well, a lot of it has to do with it's a weak queen. And it has nothing to do with anything else. It's just the fact that they just split the colony, and that split colony didn't make it. Yeah, so I was like, that's a huge, huge deal. When you look at the big picture of, look how big the populations have been decreasing, and you look at the data and you go, well, that's only because we have more information about what happens in the winter.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, because I saw that years ago. I think I did a podcast on that a couple of years back. It's been a long while, probably one of my first ones. And I noticed that the whole issue, with especially migrating colonies, where they're moving them and they're moving them back, and then they're in the summer in one place and they're in the winter in the other. And I know that they started monitoring that, and they started getting some of that data too. We just kept thinking it was everybody's blaming the neonicotinoids because they are these rented what people don't understand about bees. When we think about bees, we just think about the honey, from the general public. They're thinking about honey. They're thinking these bees are stationaries. A lot of the bees that people don't understand is that these bees are being migrated to be used in farms for pollinating and then being transported back somewhere else. Sometimes thousands of miles, putting them under an extreme amount of stress. And so,
and that's another big contributor.
Yeah. So that's been, so people don't really understand that it's not bees, that these things aren't stationary. And then you have a farmer that you're renting these bees out to, and he's spraying the fields. And, and he's killing the colonies that you're renting to them. And then people don't understand this, that it's not just a stationary farm that all of a sudden this guy's bees started dying because he has a farm and he has this, honey farm and wax farm, and we think of this book concept of what a bee farm is, and we don't understand that the majority of bees that are dying are actually being rented out or used in crop production, and then coming back and collapsing, and that's what they're not knowing, or they're not being told. So that's the biggest, like I said, headlines are awesome, except, they don't tell you the whole story.
No, and you're exactly right. And that was a big part of it too, is just that colony exhaustion is kind of what I ended up calling it. And then there's also the fact that if they have a car accident with those colonies are gone.
What was that again? I didn't hear that last part. What was that again?
So if they're transporting these colonies with trucks, right?
Yes.
If the truck has an accident, that colony's gone.
Yes.
Those colonies don't normally make it through if the truck falls over or there's an accident or things like that. Usually those colonies are gone. So you lose colonies just based on the difficulty of transporting them, period. Never mind the heat in the truck and, like I said, just the fatigue of moving them all the way up and down the East Coast or across the country so they can pollinate almonds, or all those things feed into it. And yeah, again, nobody talks about it. And there's fewer beekeepers doing that kind of work, so they've got fewer bees to do all of the work.
Right. Yeah. Let me.
And that's a big part of it.
Yeah. What it? Because I know that the varroa mite is a big contributor in colony collapse disorder. The bacterial disease that they transmit is another contributor. Any more research on that? Showing, because that seemed to me at the time I did the studies back in a couple years back, that was the biggest contributor right now, and the not treating those colonies correctly with the antibiotics or the antifungal to deal with the transmittal disease of those varroa mites and things like that. What have they been finding about those things?
So there's a couple interesting things going on with that. One being, they're looking at why in some countries are those pests not an issue for Apis mellifera, which is the Latin name for the honeybee that we're talking about, with the domesticated honeybee, what? I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I thought I lost my connection.
Yes, no, I just lost my train of thought. But that is one of them. That they were saying why some of these it's the same bee, same species, but in one country it's not as bad as another. And they find that they believe, and what that led to was they started looking at, if the bees had their choice, what would they pollinate? Well, they would rather have a giant field with irrigation ditches with weeds growing in it, and all that type of stuff. That'd be more of a natural environment. More, because of IPM and trying to do pest prevention. We're kind of trained sanitation, so you get rid of the weeds and you keep the trenches, the trenches dry and all those things, keep the irrigation down, and so that actually makes it, that actually feeds into malnourishment of the bees. They do need some variety. They do need water. If there's droughts and things, and they need water. So all those things start to feed into it too. So then they're just not as healthy. They're not thriving, and so they're more susceptible.
Gotcha.
So it's interesting how our practices in some ways feed into some of those things, and it's like this big circular thing of, well, this causes this and this causes that, and it just goes around and around. Yeah, and the other crazy thing about it was with the I've lost track of it again. Darn it! I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm distracted by bed-bug talks. And I've lost track of it, and I'm sorry, but there is something about that specifically with their health that I just can't seem to pull out of my brain. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. The other thing is that people say, I do remember now, I'm sorry. So as far as just the variety of foods go, you know how everyone's really into have pollinator-friendly gardens. Well, what they found is that, it's nice to have those, but that's not helping the bees really get the nourishment they need. That's not their preferred place to go get their nourishment. So it's nice and it doesn't hurt anything, but it's not going to fix the problem. Now, it's great for native bees and solitary bees. And these are huge components of pollination. Now, everyone seems to kind of forget about those. Bumblebees do a lot of pollinating work. In fact, they do something called sonication, where they actually disengage their wing muscles and then they vibrate.
Okay.
And they do that so they can shake the pollen out of the flower. It's the only way to get the pollen out is through sonication.
Okay.
Isn't that cool? So they don't flap their wings, but they buzz, and it shakes the pollen out, and that's how they pollinate those flowers. So a regular honeybee couldn't do that work. That's a big component of the whole thing.
Right.
We're not looking at all the other species that play a role in pollination as well.
Right. Yeah, no. So the study the studies so that we understand that they were discussed, are these more in the realm of honeybee farms that are cultivating honey or cultivating the bees for rental, or are they also studying what's happening with bees in the wild? Is it two different studies, or how is it broken down? Or because there's a big difference between something that you're also feeding artificially, you're feeding artificial nutrients to it or sugars, and then you're trying to farm this, and then something that is happening or naturally occurring in the wild. Are we seeing the same things in wild honeys, wild bees that are just have their colonies out there, or are we seeing the same thing in colonies that are being farmed? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so these were farm colonies, because that would be it would be difficult to collect that kind of data as far as where they were going. So this is definitely they weren't wild populations that they were seeking out to collect it.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that would be that. It probably exists somewhere. I haven't uncovered that one specifically, but that would be a lot harder to get that work done. Although it's definitely important. But in the big scope of things, the other thing that I found really interesting, going back to the varroa mite and the fungal disease and nosema, one of the things that they also found is that once one bee is infected and it goes to a flower and it pollinates it, some of that disease or the mite stay behind on the flower, and it can cross-infect the next pollinator.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so it's another one of those things to go, once you hear it, you go, that makes sense, but you don't really think about. So that's another way that these are being spread. And so that's why they think it happens more in some countries than in others, because it's being spread through the natural native populations and just being circled back to honeybees. And so that's how they're sometimes getting infected. So yeah, that's a whole other level and component of complexity of what's going on and why.
So we're getting a lot more data that we didn't have just a couple of years ago on what is actually going on with bees, and it just and I said it, I could be wrong, but I said it back a couple of years back. I said my thing is it's not going to be neonicotinoids. It is something else that's causing this, and everybody is just easy to point out the neonicotinoid and ignore everything else and not have the science. Because we looked at the data, there's just not enough data there until they put together, I forgot how many years ago it was that they put together this organization, and the government just really took seriously the studying of the problem. So, we started pointing the finger at, hey, it's the neonics, let's ban them all over Europe. And then there's no serious data, and now we're getting serious data, and the preliminary data shows, hey, it's not the neonicotinoids necessarily, it's something else, and we don't know what that something else, and we still probably don't know till with all the data we have. I think we're just starting to scratch the surface, so that that people don't have this. And let me ask you this: was there any studies done? Over here we've got the Africanized honeybee, and we're suspecting that the majority of colonies now that in Florida that they're finding are Africanized. And even in different parts of the world, they're actually starting now to take Africanized bee and just, cultivating that for honey and everything else in farms. Are they finding there's any difference between the two species of bees that are more susceptible or not, or is it any information on that?
I did not see any information on that.
Okay.
And now that you point that out, that's kind of interesting. I didn't notice anything about that. I think that's because all the money is going into Apis mellifera. And even the pesticide data that is being generated that shows, well, there's something going on, which interestingly enough about the neonicotinoids, neonicotinoids come from nicotine, right, which comes from a plant. So these bees get naturally exposed to, pyrethrum, to nicotine on their own. And it was interesting. There was one study where it showed that the bees actually prefer the flowers that gave them nicotine. And it did affect their behavior. So, you can say, well, logically, if it affects them from the direct flower, hypothetically, the pesticide could too. So, I'm not here to absolve pesticides completely, but it's just so complicated and not just.
It's not a simple cut decision, and it's more complicated than anybody. And the more data that comes out, the more complicated we realize how more complicated it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I am glad that that's happening, and that that we're able to put this out, because people then can look at it and say, well, stop reading your headlines, because it's not really helping you to get into a frenzy when the scientists can't explain it and nobody really knows. To just point the finger at something and blame something or exonerate it in any way. I mean, I think that's where we're at right now. Where we have been, but again, I keep having talk with scientists, and it's funny how news media and marketers will, overpower any real information that they're trying to get out, because it's you're ranking in Google and everything, and the information is buried on page 25. By the way, do you know where you bury a body?
No, where do we bury a body?
You bury it on the second page of Google. Nobody looks there.
You know what? I always go for the first 10, but I'm a little OCD, so.
Yeah, so there you go. So that's the and very few people use Google Scholar. So I think more people need to use Google Scholar than regular Google when they're doing their research.
True.
Because marketers will win. But marketers, dang it. But that's really cool. I mean, I'm glad that that's going on. And if you talk to anybody interesting, just a suggestion here, at these conferences, and they're willing to give you an interview that you can send to me, that would be awesome.
I would love to do that.
Yeah, you can record it on your phone. We're getting a bunch of correspondents right now doing that for us, and they're getting data, interviews in the field. Because if you the thing is, you're a really brave soul. I gotta admit this to you. You've been back a second time. I haven't had a single man come back a second time. Okay, so I mean, you were on that podcast. Are you crazy? So yeah. So I mean, the fact that you've taken your beatings and still came back, and we're willing to endure this a second time, it's just amazing. I mean, I guess women can endure more pain than men can. I mean, my wife tells me all the time,
there you go.
You're just a wimp. If you had to go through childbearing, you would know what real pain is. I'm like, no, thank God didn't wire me that way. So women, it is official, being scientifically proven on this podcast that women can tolerate more pain than men.
Too much.
Yeah, well, hey, I really want to thank you. I know you're in the conference. When is your next class? What's on the next class you're headed to or gonna listen to?
Well, let's see. Where are we on this? I want to go to. I think I'll be there just in time. There is a talk from North Carolina, and they're going to look at histamine reactions with bed bugs and talk about whether or not that's a public health risk.
Yeah, read that back because I've heard something about it, but I lost you in a click there. What was the name of that disease that is transmitting?
Histamines. Allergens.
Okay.
When you have an allergy, right, and so you have an allergic reaction. It's histamines.
Right.
That's what it's about. It's about
Okay.
whether or not bed bugs, cause people to have a histamine reaction.
Interesting. That would be very cool to know.
Yep. So I'm curious to hear that one. And then the one after that is the effect of color contrast on bed bug locomotion behavior out of Rutgers. So that ought to be interesting too.
Yeah, I get most of the stuff I get on bed bugs. I get from Rutgers. That's where I've learned most of it.
Oh yeah, Cheng Lu's he's a powerhouse.
Yeah, so it's really awesome. No, thank you again for being on the podcast. And like I said, if you got anything coming new that you want to talk about, you're always welcome to come on board and talk about it and share what you've learned and what you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I will definitely, I'll snag a few people and chat them up and send it your way.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too, Janet. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Oh, forgot to get your contact info.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, this is such a good interview.
Yeah, and I'm just a lousy marketer. So Dr. Janet Kintz-Early, and my new website will be up soon, and it is JAK Consulting.com. And my phone number is 865-360-1988. And my email is Janet, Janet, at jakconsultingservices.com. And we do continuing education classes and help manufacturers get their products registered.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.